the extent of Halaf culture in the kind of mid-green and the lighter green areas are what's known as Halaf influence. We'll talk about what exactly archaeologists mean when they say that. So Halaf culture replaced Hassuna culture, extends later in time, and you're going to see that there's some unique aspects to Halaf culture that make it distinct from Samara and make them distinct from Hassuna culture, and that mainly consists of the polychrome pottery. That is pottery with multiple colors on it. The tholoi, which is a specific kind of building, and also the use of stamp seals, which were probably used to mark property or seal vessels, something that becomes even more important later on in Mesopotamian history. The Halaf were in the dry farming zone in northern Mesopotamia. They had, domesticated wheat and barley and animal herds like sheep and goat. They had some cattle, but not very much, although cattle were depicted on the pottery. Here you can see Tel Halaf, which was one of the first site where the Halaf culture was identified. But we're going to look mainly at a site called Arpachia, which is one of the best known sites from the Halaf period. So the Halaf pottery it really consists of two types. There's the plain ware, and then there's the finely decorated, polished wares. And a lot of the Halaf pottery is polychrome. So here you can see there's red, black, and white paint, or red and black. But you can see, so here you can see red and black. Here you can see red, black, and white. So more than just the brown on buff color that we saw in the Samarran pottery. We also get these kind of effigy vessels. This is in the shape of a pig, you can see over here. We get geometric shapes, and a lot of the pottery is really finely made. Here are the different kinds of geometric patterns found on Halaf pottery. The tholoi is a specific kind of structure that's found in Halaf sites. Not all of the buildings are tholoi, but some in some of these sites you'll have a few of these tholoi, and the term comes from a kind of burial structure that's found in ancient Greece, which is why it uses the Greek term. Those burial structures would have kind of a entryway and then the circular chamber, and that's what you see with the Atholos or the tholoi. It's a round room with an attached rectangular room. The specific purposes of each room is debated. Here you can see this is in northern Iraq. Another Halaf site called Tepe Gawra that we're going to look at. You can see here's a stone foundation of Atholos. This is in Turkey. Some people think that different activities were going on in different parts of Atholos. That is, the different things, different areas may have been used for different purposes. And this is based on the archaeology and the artifacts that were found in some of these tholoi. So, in some areas of the tholoi, they found pestles. In the round part, they found spindle whorls and loom weights and bone awls. So they believe that weaving might have occurred within the round section of the buildings, while the rectangular building was used for the storage of grain. And they also found ceilings in the rectangular section too, and that might have been used to sort of record the storage of grain and other things. So there might have been, this is one interpretation, some gender differentiation within the architecture. We know later on that most of the weavers were women in Mesopotamia. So some people have hypothesized that the round area was mainly the realm of women and weaving, and the rectangular part was more associated with men and storage of grain. That's one hypothesis. We also see different kinds of these female figurines. The style of the figurines, you can see, is not like the Samarran figurines with the coffee bean shaped eyes, although a lot of the figurines you can see the heads got knocked off, although some of the heads you can see here are not knocked off, but they're very, very small. They don't have those coffee bean shaped eyes. So these style figurines are specific to Halaf and different from the cultures that we saw in central Mesopotamia, the Samarran culture. We start to see more and more of these ceilings. As we're going to see, ceilings typically imply control. We can think of ceilings through history, like signet ring ceilings, seals that we use today. We're going to talk more about ceilings, but when you seal something, you do it to know if someone has tampered with something or gotten in something. When you seal an envelope, right, and then the other person receives it, they check to see that it's still, the back of the envelope is still, stuck together. If it's not, then they wonder if someone had actually opened it and taken something from inside out. So here you can see the different kinds of stones. These are stamp seals that were used to press into clay and maybe seal something like a sack or a jar or a container like that. So early pottery in the Halaf period was crude, and then it became much better until it became these kind of prestige good items. The Halaf, again, is usually a buff-colored clay with a polychrome decoration. And a lot of people think that the pottery at this time is really, in some ways, the zenith of pottery making in Mesopotamia. Here you can see from Arpachias some of this beautiful plate I showed you a little bit before, and you can see this jar over here. Okay, so Halaf culture tends to be identified through several characteristics. Plain pottery and also polychrome pottery. Architecture, the tholoi, right? And that there are houses that are not tholoi. Tholoi are just a few of the houses. Dry farming, so usually in a northern Mesopotamia. It looks like some sort of egalitarian exchange network. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Homogeneous villages that are fairly small that surround a central place. That's the sort of outline of the architecture. And the Halaf culture spreads out into other parts of northern Mesopotamia and also Anatolia, parts of Anatolia that border on northern Mesopotamia. So these settlements are not as big as Samarran sites. There might be clustering of small sites around larger ones. The population density is fairly low, right? So you don't see people really crammed together in these Halaf sites. You can see here again the Halaf kind of core area. And this is where you find the architecture, the ceramics, all the elements of Halaf culture. In these areas, the lighter colored areas, the Halaf influenced areas, you typically find Halaf pottery, but maybe not the tholoi and the stamp seals and things like that. So how could we explain a broadly similar ceramic and architecture style over a wide geographic area? What does it actually mean? And what accounts for the spread of this material from northern Mesopotamia to areas you can see as far away as southeast Turkey? Well, people could come up with different explanations. I'm sure you could try and explain it. Maybe you actually want to pause for a second and just write a couple of explanations down. How would you explain the spread of pottery and architecture styles over a wide area? Some people think it's migration of people, bringing these things with them. Some people think it's the result of trade, and people in those areas then adopting or the trading in such numbers that they have Halaf pottery. Some people believe that it's trade, but also diffusion of ideas and styles. So people adopting it, and it's not necessarily people moving, but people adopting the culture and then producing it themselves. Another explanation would be conquest, but there's no evidence of conquest, of a military conquest. Right? So what is this? Is it migration of people? Is it trade? Is it diffusion of ideas? Is it a combination of all of those or some of those? What does it mean to have this culture, quote unquote? Is it an ethnicity? Is it a language group? What exactly is going on? There's a lot of debate about that. Here's the site of Arpachea. Again, Arpachea, like other Halaf sites, usually centered around an open area. One of the most important finds from Arpachea is this area over here, which was a highly burned building, which is why the preservation in the building is so great. Typically, burning and destruction is great for archaeology because it preserves everything from that moment. When things are abandoned, things are usually pulled out of the building, and then the building's used as a trash dump. If a house is burned or a building is burned, it's usually left. They sort of, the roof will collapse and they'll maybe build right on top of it. They usually won't go in and take everything out of it necessarily. And so a destruction event kind of is almost like a little bit of a Pompeii effect. All right, here you can see Arpachea. And again, this burned house, they had great preservation. And Max Mallowan, the husband of Agatha Christie, as we'll see, excavated in this burned building, and there's been a lot of debate as to what exactly the burned building was. Well, what they found is they found the rectangular area of an earlier Atholos being used in a slightly later time period. A lot of items were preserved inside of the burnt building. They found clay figurines. They found stone vases. They found amulets made out of semi-precious stone. They found flint and obsidian tools. They found lots of pottery, beautiful pottery, lying close to the walls of the room, resting on carbonized pieces of wood, probably indicating that the pots were on shelves along the walls, and then when the house or the building burned, those shelves crashed to the ground with the pottery on top of them. On the floor, they found flint and obsidian cores for making obsidian tools. They found red ochre, which is a mineral that's used for painting and decoration. They found stone pallets that were used for mixing paint. And they found bone tools that were used for making pottery. So they found some tools. They found lots of important craft items. What exactly was this place? Around the burnt building, they found this reddish clay that was packed down to form kind of a surface around the burnt building. And it looks like this was kind of an important area within the site. So there have been different interpretations. We're going to look at some of these interpretations, but maybe you could come up with some on your own. Right here, you have a pretty important building. It might have actually been burnt deliberately. You find a lot of these different craft items located within it. A lot of these prestige goods. Obsidian doesn't exist in this area. It had to be traded from Turkey. So maybe, pause the video for a sec and, write down one idea to explain what exactly this building could have been in ancient times. Okay, here's some of the painted pottery. So here you can see from Arpachea here, very finely decorated. And Agatha Christie, who was there during the excavation, talks about the discovery and says there were glorious dishes, vases, cups, and plates, polychrome pottery, all shining in the sun, scarlet and black and orange, a magnificent sight. and the work that they engaged in. She says that we were so frantically busy we didn't know how to cope. Vessel after vessel came up. They were smashed, but they were there and could be nearly all be reconstructed. This is a picture of the local workers and some of the foreign archaeologists at the site of Arpacia, and sitting in the front is Max Mallowan. You can see also here, and here's Agatha Christie. And Agatha Christie actually wrote a book about what it was like to be on archaeological digs in the Middle East. It's called Come Tell Me How You Live. It's actually a really good book. I started reading it not that long ago after years of having it on my to-do list. And it's there's a lot of humor in it. Obviously, Agatha Christie doesn't take herself too seriously. It really gives you an inside perspective of what it's like to live in a dig house like this in Syria or in northern Iraq, working on one of these excavations. So if you're curious to see what it might have been like, and it's still much the same as the way she describes, there's obviously some differences. But if you want to see sort of an insider's view into an archaeological dig, pick up Come Tell Me How You Live. So here's Agatha Christie at another site, Mallowan excavated Chagar Bazaar. She took pictures. She did a lot of the pottery analysis. And she also wrote her mystery stories there as well. She spent, some people think about, when she was married to Max Mallowan, a third of the year in the Middle East. And she loved it. She really enjoyed being there. Some of her mystery stories, as I said before, take place in the Middle East. Okay, so was Halaf culture a chiefdom? Well, there's some debate about that. So some people think, so one interpretation of the burnt house was that it was a chief's house. This is where the chief lived. This is why he found all these important prestige goods. Other people are not so sure about that. Max Mallowan himself thought it was a workshop, which is why you find some tools. If it's a workshop, it looks like they were making many different craft items there. And some people feel that that doesn't really make a lot of sense, because typically workshops will specialize in specific crafts and be separated from each other. Doesn't look like it was a chief's house either. So another more recent interpretation is by an expert in the field of Halaf culture, Stuart Campbell, and he believes that it had a ritual function. That several of the tholoi at Arpacia were enclosed by a wall, and this might have been some kind of special precinct or area of the site. The fill, again, surrounding the tholoi and the burnt room was reddish clay that was brought in. And so what Stuart Campbell believes is that this burnt building was used for exchange within the local community. Right? That is, resources were kind of pooled in the house or in the building and then redistributed in the context of special rituals or gatherings to other members of the community. So it's still not exactly clear. That's one of the frustrating things, but also some people find one of the fun things about archaeology is that you have these debates, you have these mysteries, and sometimes you don't necessarily know exactly what was going on. So, was Halaf society a chiefdom? Well, it certainly seems to be less complex than the Samarran culture. There may have been some ranking. If it was it was either a large tribe or a very, very simple chiefdom, but it doesn't really look like the chiefdoms that we have learned about from other areas of the world. As we're going to see, part of this has to do with northern Mesopotamia versus southern Mesopotamia. With irrigation, you have much higher yields of food. Because Halaf culture exists in the dry farming area, there's a limit to how much crops could actually be produced. Right? but you don't see the kind of clear evidence for chiefdoms that you see in Samarran culture. All right, the next culture we're going to look at is, it dates to a little bit after Halaf culture. It overlaps with Halaf culture and then extends further in time. And this is the Ubaid culture. And this is the first agricultural settlement in southern Mesopotamia, so south of the Samarran culture, which was more in central Mesopotamia.